Hello, my name is Talamander, and this is a Blender tutorial aimed at a beginner that's never used Blender before on how to create this vintage game-ready pocket watch. Now, this tutorial is going to cover the basics of Blender, how we can manipulate the environment. It's not necessarily recommended for someone's first foray into Blender. I would recommend Andrew Price or Blender Guru for some excellent beginner tutorials, but after you complete that, this may be a good next step. Now, to complete this, you're going to need not only Blender, but you're going to need access to Substance Painter as well, whether that's through a student license or you've purchased the program or you've subscribed to Adobe's packages, whatever it may be, we're going to be using Substance Painter to texture this game-ready asset. So you also want a software called PureRef, which is free. And this is what it looks like right here. And this is where we're going to drag in our reference images. So let's just go ahead and start and populate the reference images we want to use. You can download all of them in the description below. Okay, so these are the set of reference images I'm going to use, aiming to most closely replicate this pocket watch right here. However, there is one more thing that you're going to need to get that I can't give you, and that is a set of alphas. Now, later on in the texturing process, we're going to be using alphas to texture in a lot of this outer detail. And I purchased a pack from, I believe, ArtStation several months ago. It's been quite a while. I don't remember how much it cost. It was under $10. But you can either make your own using Photoshop or Blender, find some free ones online, or go purchase the ones down in the description below. I'll try to find the link that I used. It's not a referral link, but if you want to follow along exactly, you are going to need a set of decorative alphas to utilize in the texturing process. But even if you don't have that, it's still okay. You can still learn a lot from watching this video and just going through everything that we're going to be going through. So no need to worry. I know how difficult it can be as a beginner in Blender when a tutorial doesn't give you absolutely everything, but that's life, so get used to it. You want to be a 3D artist, you're going to have to get used to improvising and going with different solutions. Sorry, but that's the fact of the matter. And honestly, I think it's more of a disservice to absolutely show you everything than it is to let you figure out things on your own. And I know as a beginner that sucks. I do, because I was once in your shoes, and I'm still relatively new to this compared to a lot of other talented and hardworking people out there. But this is just how it's going to be. So anyways, this is sort of the first chapter. We're going to move into the second chapter, which is where we're going to open up Blender and start laying out some reference images and blocking out our mesh. Okay, so welcome to chapter 2. This is where we're going to go into Blender. So let's go ahead and right click and drag PureRef off of the screen to our other monitor. If you don't have another monitor, I'm sorry. But I'm sorry. That's all I can say about that. Let's go to new, and this is what you're going to see as soon as you open up Blender and you start a new project. Let's delete everything by pressing A and then X to delete. And let me go ahead and turn on my screencast add-on. Don't have it, so let me go download it. I'll be right back. Okay, now my screencast keys are operating, so you're going to be able to see my keystrokes down here as well as my mouse presses. Now, let's talk about the add-ons that I have enabled. Now, I do have some third-party paid add-ons here, but I'm going to disable them because they're not going to be necessary for what we're doing. Easy HDRI is an excellent add-on. You should go download as well. We can use it during the rendering process, but it's not required. It's just a simple way to set up HDRIs, okay? Let me go ahead and just disable some that are not relevant. Loop Tools is one you will want to go ahead and enable. It ships with Blender. You just have to turn it on, as well as Node Wrangler. That's an excellent one as well. And then the Interface Modifier Tools. This is also one that if you're working with game-ready assets, you should just honestly enable it, and then you can come down here and press Save Preferences. So go ahead and do that. All right, now we're ready to bring in our reference image. So let's press 1 on our numpad, go to Front Orthographic View. And essentially, what the orthographic view is, if we bring in a cube, it just gives us the view without perspective versus this being perspective view. It's orthographic. It's a type of camera angle. So let's go ahead and drag in our reference image. Okay, this is the reference image I'm going to be using. I think it's going to give me a good enough base to start from. It's not the most high quality image. In fact, I just had to sort of snip it because the original format wasn't a PNG, but that's okay. So we're going to bring it in and then just press G and then Y to lock it to the Y-axis and move it back here. All right, so now if we press 1 on our numpad, we're still looking at the front. If we press 3, we're going to be in right orthographic view, and we won't be able to see it because there it is. And then if we press Control 1, we'll be in the back orthographic view. But we want to be in the front. So this is how it should be oriented right now along the positive Y-axis. If we go up here, this is the negative Y-axis, positive Y, negative X, positive X, Z, and then negative Z. So keep that in mind if you're ever kind of lost in my orientation. Just look up here and see how I have it set up. So now we want to go ahead and save this because we want to make a real good habit of saving our stuff. So let's just navigate to wherever you want to save it. I'm going to make a new folder. For some reason, I don't already have one called Tutorials. And then inside of Tutorials, I'm going to rename this to PocketWatch.blend. We'll go ahead and save that. Now we can double click up here and rename this to Reference and pull it outside of our major collection. And there we go. Let's go back into front orthographic view and add in a UV sphere. Now we can pop over into perspective with middle mouse click, sort of rotate around this beautiful sphere we have here. Now we're going to press R to start rotating this, and it's going to rotate basically whatever perspective we're in right now. But if we want to lock it to something, just like we moved that along the Y-axis, we're going to lock it. We're going to rotate it along the X-axis 90 degrees. So we just type in 90 on our keyboard and then press Enter. And now it is perfectly rotated 90 degrees. Now we're going to come into top orthographic view and hold down Z and go to wireframe. Double tap A to deselect everything and then press B for box select. We're going to select this front half. Press X to delete the vertices. Now we can go back into object mode, and there we go. We're done. I'm kidding. All right, we're not done, but this is the beginning of our watch. Let's go into edit mode and wireframe and then scale this down and match it somewhat to our reference image. We want to basically not edit anything right now and keep the curvature. Okay, so what I want to do is, for some reason that's not, I mean it's fine, but it's not perfectly flush. That's fine though. What we're going to do is come into edge select mode and then alt left click this edge and press H to hide it. Actually, we're going to do that in vertice mode, and that'll hide all those vertices and the edges connected to them. And then we're going to click on this vertice right here and turn on proportional editing, and I'll show you what proportional editing does, which is right here. Let's turn it off for a second. And this is what it would do without proportional editing. We turn it on and it's affecting a wider range. If we scroll our mouse wheel, we'll have a greater influence or a lesser influence depending on the direction we've scrolled. So that's going to give us some insights that we're going to need. A hotkey to access proportional editing is O. However, I find O kind of far away on my keyboard, so I typically just come up here and click it. Let's go into side view and then use proportional editing, lock it on the Y-axis, and maybe we'll increase our area of influence here with Control plus and bring it in more like that, and then come in here again, grab that one and make it more like that. We're still looking pretty thick, so what I may do is just grab all this and push it up just a little bit. And then come in here, press Alt H to unhide everything. And then scale this in along the Y-axis. We can turn off proportional editing for this. It's not needed, but we're trying to maintain the shape of the watch. And if we look at some of our reference images, we can kind of see it's rather thin. Maybe you want to go find some more reference images of some pocket watches that will show you the side view. But I'm working mainly on guesswork here, and that's okay. You don't have to be precise all of the time. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and turn on Shade Smooth just to see what it looks like. I think that's looking all right. We can undo that for now because we don't really need, sometimes I just do that. It's not really needed. One thing you want to really get in the habit of is making sure your scale, rotation, and location, most importantly though your scale, forget the rotation and location, that your scale is set to 1. If it's not, then you need to press Control A and apply scale. This is going to affect your modifiers later on if you have a scale that's not 1, 1, 1. So you need to make sure you're constantly doing that. What may affect that is if you start scaling it in object mode. If you scale it in edit mode, the object still stays at 1:1 scale. But if you do it in object mode, it will affect that. Okay. The dimensions are also important to note, but we can fix this later. It's currently 1.74 meters tall, which is pretty dang tall. You know, I'm a foot guy myself, so I don't know what that comes out to, but it's a pretty tall watch as it currently stands, but that's okay. We don't need to worry about that just yet. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is actually enable a mirror modifier, and we're going to enable this along the Z-axis. We're going to turn on clipping, and then you may have some intersecting points here, depending on where your watch is placed. So turn on clipping and then start moving the entire thing along the Y-axis and move it until it clips back into place. You may have to come here, click, and then come back and move it back in. Now, our watch isn't looking too good right now, and you know that's obviously not really what we're after, but that's okay for now. What we're going to do is come back in here and manipulate this shape again. So let's come into face select with 3 on our keyboard, press C for circle select. Sometimes if your cursor is stuck in a circle or a lasso, you just come and hold this click up here, and then you can change it. But let's go to circle select and turn back on proportional editing and try to get more of the shape we want. So we're really just eyeballing this here and using our creativity and our eye to guide us. We're not necessarily relying on reference images for this part. And you may or may not like that kind of workflow. Okay. If you want more precise blueprints, feel free to go find them. But this is how I propose we do it. Okay, so for now, we're actually getting some weird indentation here, it looks like, which isn't what we want, but we can fix that pretty easily. Let's just select all of these as, select all these and do S. Let's turn off proportional editing, S, and then Y, and then press 0. And we should be flush. And now if we turn on our magnet tool, snap it to vertex, and then G and then Y, we can snap it there. And that will fix. We still have some weirdness going on here, but that is something I'm okay with for now because we're about to really change all of this up. Now, one thing I also would like to do is sort of just manually turn off snapping, manually move this or scale it up just a little bit, move it in, scale it up just a little bit to make that more of a harsh bevel there. Now we can go ahead and apply our mirror modifier. Make sure you have clipping enabled there, or else you're going to get some pretty funky results, okay? So now that we have this, let's pop into our front view in edit mode. And actually, let's just go ahead and come into top view and hide the back half. Okay, we don't want to work with the back half right now. We want to work with the front. Let's grab this edge loop and scale it up just a little bit. And make sure we're using bounding box center for this, okay? Scale up just a little bit, and then select all of these faces and delete them. Okay. Now, if we go into object mode, this is what we currently have. This is going to be the inside of the watch. Now we can just take this edge loop. Let me go ahead and undo that. I did that a little fast for some of our newer Blender users out there. Let's Alt and then left click. Now this is assuming you're using left click to select. If you're using right click, if you're an OG Blender user, obviously you're going to right click. So select that edge loop and press E and then Y to extrude it back along the Y axis. We can face it up and then press I to inset. And right now, let's just inset it to there. We'll come back to this, but that's going to give us a little bit of geometry to look at. Now, I still think we're a little bit on the thick side, but this is something we can fix later down the road. We're just really here to get a basic shape to work with right now. One thing I would like to go ahead and do is come up here and click on this little arrow and come down and turn on cavity and shadow. Okay, I think it's a little nicer to look at. It's going to allow us to see exactly where our curvature is. We're getting a little funky results here. Again, that's okay. We'll fix it. No need to worry. But that'll just give us a little bit better, a little more interesting thing to look at. If we turn on smooth shading, we can see all of our shading issues here. That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and show you, since we're here, about something that you may or may not have turned on, which is auto smooth. Now, if we click auto smooth, it is going to automatically mark sharp certain edge loops and vertices that hit a certain angle limit. So if we decrease this, we can see the effects it may have. If we increase it to, say, 80, we can see everything is smooth besides this. Typically, I keep it on the default, which is like 30 or 60. But we also could just turn it off and do it manually, which is going to give us more granular control over what's going on. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and mark sharp, which looks like Control E is the shortcut for that. And then we can just mark sharp. And it did nothing. Okay, this is one of those moments where I had to pause the recording and start Googling what's going on because I don't often work in this workflow. I'm purposefully not using a lot of the add-ons I use for hard surface modeling, like HardOps and Box Cutter, to make this appeal to a wider audience. So it looks like we need to either use the edge split modifier, which automatically sort of enables its own sort of auto smooth. We can uncheck that though and just use sharp edges, and it will only sharpen the ones we tell it to. Or alternatively, just turn on auto smooth and hope for the best. But again, we're going to try to avoid using auto smooth here because for a beginner, you might not quite grasp what is actually going on. And this is going to give you a finer level of control that you need for certain meshes. So let's go ahead and just enable the edge split modifier. Later, we may replace this with a bevel modifier, but currently we're just going to keep it as is for now. Let's go ahead and come up here to the top right and name our object. We're going to call this clock or watch. We'll just call it body. I mean, it's pretty standard that we're talking about the watch here. So we'll just call it body for now. And later we'll append this with a low poly prefix. But for now, we'll keep it as is. And let's go ahead and start working on this little stem here. I don't know what it's called, but we're going to call it a stem. Now, if you haven't seen it, I've published a 2-hour-long course that I was first hosted on Udemy. I was selling it, made a decent bit of money there, but decided to make it free on YouTube so everyone could watch it and benefit from it, making a game-ready katana in Blender and Substance Painter. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because I caught a lot of flack for not knowing a lot of the terminology that seems to come with this sort of anime Japanese loving crowd. Okay, so if there's any vintage watch lovers out there, I'm surely going to catch a lot of stuff like this isn't actually a vintage watch because it says quartz, and those weren't around until the 70s. But, that's okay. We're not here to be accurate. We're here to make cool models and learn how to use Blender. So let's go ahead and add in a cylinder and give it 24 vertices. Now, this vertices count is pretty arbitrary, but I'm trying to keep it low-ish because it's a game asset. We can even go 18. Let's just go 18. And then scale it down. And before we do that, let's just go ahead and undo that. And make sure our 3D cursor is centered in the scene. Press Shift-C to recenter that, okay? One thing I'm also going to do is make a new collection and just move it up there and move my reference in there. I'm going to call this Reference Images. Sorry, that was my wife texting me. Let me go ahead and turn off my phone integration here. But there we go. So now that we have all that set up, let's just press Shift-C again, recenter it. Great. And now we kind of notice that since we have objects over here, our everything's kind of wonky. So we're going to select our body and press Delete on the numpad, and this will center the camera back in, give us a finer level of control. Doing that, selecting something, pressing Delete on the numpad will immediately focus your camera's origin to that object, to that object's origin point or the specific vertex or face or edge you selected. So that's something good to know as well. So again, let's go ahead and make sure we're centered and add in a cylinder with 18 vertices, scale it down, move it up, and we're not in the center. Oh, because look at that, we were not centered. Or were we? The watch isn't centered. Okay, so this is the first sort of roadblock we've hit. So what I'm going to do to recenter my watch body is go into edit mode and press Alt-H to unhide everything. And then I'm going to set the origin to the geometry. So now the object's origin is in the middle of all the geometry, and then we can zero out the location. And now if we add in a cylinder, should be right in the center. Looks perfect. We may have to sort of realign our reference image because we weren't working off the center to begin with, but that's okay. The reference image is not a rule. It's mere of a suggestion, mere guidelines. You don't have to follow it. Okay, so what we're going to do with this stem is scale it down to roughly fit about right there, and then we're going to apply the scale. Because if we come over here and look at the scale, look at what we have. If we applied a bevel modifier to this right now, which we're going to do later, our results are going to be rather interesting. Okay, let's just apply this bevel, shade it smooth, and then apply the scale and see what changes. Look at that. It completely changed. Completely changed everything. Versus once we have applied the scale, we really need a bevel of like 0.005 versus what we did have of 0.06. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that, shade it back to flat, and apply the scale. Make sure you're always applying scaled things. Rotation, location don't matter in this context, but the scale absolutely does. So since this is a game asset, one of the first things I'm going to do is delete any unneeded geometry. We're really trying to save face here and delete any faces or geometry that's unneeded. So I bet you can already guess which part of the mesh I'm going to delete, but it's the part that's clipping into the bottom. So if we press / on our numpad, go into edit mode, select this face, we can delete it with X. And then there we go, saving a little bit here. One thing we can go ahead and do is come up here and turn on, up here and turn on statistics. And we can see our current triangle and poly count. We're going to shoot for about 4,000 to 6,000 for this game asset, which is kind of a lot, depending on how it'll be used. We could get it a lot lower if it's a really minor asset in our game, but if it's going to be something that players holding, in a modern AAA game of, that sort of graphical fidelity, if the player's holding it, it's going to be in front of the camera very closely, 4,000 to 6,000 will be fine. Okay, now let's come into front orthographic view here, come into edit mode, and then we see we have some sort of like bulgy type stuff. So let's add in some loop cuts. We'll add in 2 right here, and then we'll bevel both of those one more time to give us something that looks like that. Now let's just see what happens. Yeah, that'll work. So what we'll do is we'll also add one more up here at the top, and then we'll come into face select, Alt left click, Alt left click one of them, Alt Shift left click the other one to select both, and then just scale it up. Well, hold on. We're actually going to need, let's just undo all that. Yeah, we're going to have to bevel that, and then bevel that, and now, okay, let's add in an edge loop here, bevel that out, and then another one here, bevel that out, and then an edge loop there, and then now when we scale these up, we're getting the result we're looking for. So we're going to need to add just another one right there to sort of contain all of that. Now as we scale these up, maybe move it down just a little bit, scale up a little bit more. That's sort of the effect we have over there. So that's looking good. Our scale is still at 1. And for now, we'll keep it as is. If we shaded it smooth right now, that's sort of what it would look like once we add a bevel modifier. Let's just go ahead and I'll do that. No need to follow along with this part. In fact, we'll just worry about this later because there's other stuff we need to do to that. So let's go ahead and shade it flat again. Now we're going to go make this little piece right here, which sort of holds this. If we go look at our pure ref, maybe we can get some other views of it. So this is kind of like a curved little bowl. Not all of them have them, but we're going to make one that does because it's a little more interesting of a shape versus something like that. Okay, so what we're going to do is select this face, and we're going to extrude it up and scale it out. We're going to sort of follow the shape here. Again, this is a reference image. We don't have to follow it entirely, so we're going to take some liberties here, and we're going to bevel this out right here, which then leaves us with this. Let's turn on proportional editing and try to move this down a little bit, maybe to something like that. What I want to do as to not affect the geometry of all this is hide this, and then start scaling this in along the Y because it's a little wide for my liking. And we'll see what sort of results we have. Something kind of like that is the overall shape I'm going for. So that's fine. Now what we want to do is make it curve. So to do that, let's go ahead and delete this face for now. Select maybe this edge and then this edge on opposing sides. And hide all this down here. You have to do that in wireframe to get both sides. Hide all that down there. And then pull this up to match the curvature very roughly. And now let's bring back in everything so we can see what's going on. Get a little more detail in there, a little more granularity. Okay, so something like that is the general shape we're going for. Let's go ahead and face this in. Let's select that whole edge loop and press F to create a face. Sorry, my screencast keys were turned off, so I'm going to turn that back on now. So right now we have an N-gon. Not only that, I believe it's called a non-planar N-gon. A lot of shading issues, very bad geometry. So what we're going to do is inset this, pressing I, and it's going to create a quad loop. And you see we can only go in so far before it gets kind of messy. So what we're going to do is bring it in to about here and then delete that face. And now we have something we can work with. All right, it's not great, but it gets the job done to a certain extent, and will let us do what we need to do. Let's go ahead and pull this edge loop down a little bit because it looks like it curves in. What we'll do is we'll also add in like an edge loop here and then pull it in to sort of maintain that bevel on the outside. Pull it into about there, and then maybe for now, you know, what we'll do is we'll just keep it as is, and we'll come back to this spot. Well, what you're going to learn about modeling is that there's not a right and wrong way to do a lot of things. Now, there's ways that look good and will perform well in Engine, and there's sort of standards you're going to learn as you progress. But a lot of it just comes down to how you want to do it. You know, looking at other people's models, it's like, yeah, that's the way they did it, but that's not necessarily the way you're going to do it. And you're going to have to make concessions, not only based on your skill level, but the time you have and the easiest way that makes itself apparent to you. So don't stress about these things too much, as long as your topology isn't crazy and like you don't have any glitching issues. But currently, that's what we're going to roll with for now. And you know what we're going to do is we're actually going to face this in. So we'll create these edges and start facing them in. So what I'm doing is selecting one vertice, selecting the other with shift clicking, and then pressing F to make a face, and then selecting the two edges to make a face. And then you can just kind of come in and press F, and then there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and see what this looks like with smooth shading and a auto smooth turned on. Okay, yeah, I mean, it's got some issues, but we're going to fix those, so that's fine. I'm just going to undo that. It's going to work for our purposes for sure. All right, now that we have this stem, we're going to call it the stem. Let's go ahead and move it into the correct collection, which we're going to call watch_LP for low poly. And we'll go ahead and just abide by the naming convention and go ahead and name everything else _low poly. Okay, so we're almost done with chapter 1, but before we finish, I want to make this part, and then we're going to leave this outer chain until later in the process, a future chapter. We're just going to focus on making this right here. And you may notice we're not really following the reference image. I mean, the reference image looks bigger, but you have to understand we're in orthographic view. That image is taken with a perspective camera, and if we want to scale it up a little bit, we can. It's nothing against that. Maybe it'll look better, scaled up a little bit. But that's also a decision we don't have to make right now. I'm going to go ahead and scale mine up just a tad and then apply the scale. Make sure it's 1:1:1. And then maybe later, if we decide it needs to be smaller, we can make that decision then. Now let's go ahead and just, since this origin point, as long as it is in the center of the x-axis, which it is, we can go ahead and press Shift-S, cursor to selected, and then add in a new cylinder with 18 vertices as well, and scale it down. Now, the reason I did that instead of just pressing Shift-C to recenter it is because, you don't have to move it as much. It's just laziness, really. But you just got to make sure that you know what you're doing and you know where your origin is at before you make that sort of decision. And when you're a beginner, things can get a little dicey sometimes. So let's just scale this out to kind of roughly sit in this bowl here. And then we can press / isolate it, delete the bottom face because we're not going to need it. And then, make sure to apply the scale. And then select this top face in edit mode. And let's scroll out because this gets kind of blurry. This is where we can lean on some of our reference images to see, exactly what it is they're doing. So, it just looks like it kind of comes out there. So we're going to take this face and scale it out to about there. Bring it up to about here, and then here, scale it back in, and then up to here, and up to here, and maybe something like that, I think it's probably looking a little tall, so let's just move the whole thing down. Because again, we're not following this reference image exactly, but something like that, and then applying the scale, making sure you have that done. All right, so this has been it for Chapter 1. We've achieved a block out for the majority of the pocket watch. And in the next chapter, we will do what we do. I haven't decided yet, but maybe this part. The only thing we're not going to cover in this tutorial is the chain, but there are plenty of how to make a chain tutorials out there on Blender. And you can do it procedurally. You just model one chain link, and then you use a bunch of modifiers, and you can use curves to populate that curve with the chains. And yeah, that's outside the scope of this interview. It's really tutorial, and not really necessary for what we're trying to do. So, see you in the next chapter. Thanks for watching so far. All right, welcome to Chapter 2. In this one, we're going to focus on sort of finishing out the block out, and that includes this part right here. Now, the way we're going to do this is I'm going to introduce you to a new concept in Blender. And to do that, I'm going to start up a new project real quick, just to show you something. You do not have to follow along with this, but it's curves. If you've never worked with a curve before, then you're in for a wild ride. It's not that bad though, but essentially a curve is an object that is somewhat procedural, and I believe it's procedural anyways, and you can just extrude these points and make it follow a certain path, and you can manipulate these handles to do the same thing. Now, curves are something you're going to start working with a lot when you get into more intricate detail and trying to do some procedural stuff with modifiers. So it's worth bringing up for this. There's plenty of ways we could model this, but this is going to be one of the easiest and the fastest. It may be a little daunting at first, but we're going to work through it together. I'm going to do my best to explain it. So what we're going to do is make sure, let's just select this object, make sure our 3D cursor is in the center of the x-axis. It's okay if it's up here though. And let's add in a Bezier curve and move it up. Now what we're going to do is come into edit mode on that curve and select all the points with, by double tapping A, and scale it along the y-axis to 0. So press, scale, Y, and then 0 on your keyboard, and it will look like this. This is what we want. Now we're going to take this point, move it down here, roughly there, and then this point we're going to move it up here. This one we're going to need to rotate, and we're in front orthographic view when we do this, and then grab this handle and bring it in to about there, and then we're actually going to scale this along the z-axis to be 0, so it's completely flat when it ends. And let's move this one maybe more so right here. We can even bring in this handle a little bit, and yeah, and then we're going to do the exact same thing for the other side. This side's not so important because we're actually going to use a mirror modifier. So yeah, this is just kind of get the general shape. Okay, now that we have that, even though this side is wonky, that's okay. What we're going to do is come into object mode and then go to object. I don't know where it's at, but we're going to press spacebar to search and then just type convert, and then you'll see object convert to mesh. So I believe it would be under object and then convert, yeah, curve to mesh. And now this is a mesh. It's no longer a curve. It's a selection of vertices. And what are we going to do with this? Well, excellent question. We're going to add in, well, first what we can do is go ahead and do that mirror modifier I was talking about. Let's delete the left side. and then add in a mirror modifier, turn on clipping. It automatically does the x-axis, so that's good. And then we can just move this along until it clips, and then there we go. Now we can keep the mirror modifier enabled for now. It'll help us later. Let's turn on the skin modifier and move it above the mirror modifier. Actually, let's just go ahead and apply the mirror modifier and then add the skin modifier. And it looks crazy, but we're going to come into edit mode, select everything, and then Control A to scale this down quite a bit. Okay, that's exactly what we need to do right there. And then this is when we can come in. We probably didn't have to delete that mirror modifier, but I did. So we're going to turn back on clipping and then scale this down. You know what? Let's go back. Don't delete that half. You know, this is as much of a learning experience for me as it is you. I don't work with this workflow often with curves. So anyways, we've added a skin modifier to it, and we're using Control A to scale it up and down. Let's get a thickness we roughly want, something like, you know, that looks good to me. And then we can add in a subdivision surface modifier by pressing Control 1 in object mode. We're not going to need to add any more than this. This is already more than enough for what we need. So let's go ahead and apply that skin, and then one more time, let's come in, delete that half, add in a mirror modifier above the subdivision surface, enable clipping. Let's make sure we're clipping properly. We are. Great. And there we go. We have a rough ring. Now, it doesn't look good, and it's way too highly detailed for what we're trying to do. So the best, well, there's probably a better way to do this, but the way I'm going to do it is actually coming in here and Alt clicking these edge loops, and then dissolving the edges that I think are unnecessary to the shape. So we need to make sure we're selecting everything when we do this, but we're just going to dissolve most of them because this is adding in a lot of unneeded geometry to this. And we're going to have to do this later as well. We'll go ahead and get a head start on it now. And just sort of rough out the shape just a little bit. And then on this one right here, let's make sure we select all those and then rotate it, or no, scale it along the X to 0 because we want that to be completely flush facing. And there we go. So let's go ahead and see if we enable this little preview on cage, it'll make that snap to the geometry there. Sort of preview what this is looking like. This is looking rather good. So one thing we're going to do is select these faces down here and scale it up. And we're going to do that with proportional editing kind of on with a small sphere of influence. And until we fix the, or until we apply the subdivision surface modifier, which we're going to do to clean this up even more, this is the way it's going to look. So we're just scaling it up a little bit to give it some thickness, because this is where there's essentially a rod in here, from my understanding, that inserts into here as well, and that's what lets this thing sort of hinge around. But let's just pop back here and see what that looks like. I think that's a good size. Overall, it's looking good. If we shade it smooth, it's looking rather all right. So we'll keep it as is for now. And we'll go ahead and apply the subdivision surface modifier. Now that we've done that, we can turn off proportional editing and scale this face to 0 along the x-axis. And now we're still a little dense on the geometry. I mean, for such a small piece of, a game-ready asset, we do want to tweak this up a little bit. So something we can do, I showed you how to dissolve these edges, but we can also turn on auto merge up here and then just double tap G and merge these in. And when it hits something, it's going to automatically merge when we let go. So that's another way to do it. And every other one, I'm just going to merge it into the next one. To sort of, it doesn't need a ton of definition for such a small piece, even close up. It's going to be okay. I may keep that one, and I might keep that one and just slide that one up a little bit by double tapping G, and that's okay. I think it's still, it's not super low poly here, but for now, to maintain that silhouette, we're going to keep it. And then we can also add in another subdivision surface modifier later for when we bake. But the reason we're doing this is we need to maintain the silhouette as much as we can for the baking process. And later when we get into adding in some of the high poly details, it's going to help us a lot. So there we go, looking good. Let's go ahead and apply that mirror modifier and select these faces and these faces, and then cursor to selected, which is going to give us the dead center, and then we're going to set the origin to the 3D cursor. So now it rotates. If we rotate it along the x-axis in the orientation that it should and would be if you were to animate this later on or want to pose it for a render. So just like that, we have an excellent piece. And if we want to clear that rotation, you could come up here and just press 0 on the rotation, or just Control Z. So okay, this was a rather short chapter. Probably should have been included in chapter 1, but this concludes the pretty much the low poly for the body. In the next chapter, we're going to focus on the hands and the glass section here, and then finally after that, we're going to move into working on some of that high poly detail, getting it ready to do some UV mapping, and also add in this rod here as well that's going to connect these pieces. Okay, welcome back to chapter 3. Now in this chapter, let's go ahead and rename some of our things. We're going to call this ring_LP, and then this cylinder is going to be notch_LP. Again, I don't know what these pieces are called. Honestly, don't really care. I mean, I'm a 3D modeler, not a watch collector, not a watch maker. So it's okay. If you want that specificity, go ahead and research what they're called. But that's okay. Anyways, let's go ahead and select everything, apply the scale. I'm pretty religious about that because it will bite you in the butt if you're not constantly doing that, because you'll forget about it and you'll be wondering what's going on. At this point, I want to introduce a plug here, okay, before we continue on with this chapter. If you're interested in connecting with other great 3D artists, I have a Discord, and there's about 100 3D artists in there. And actually, let me just go ahead and pull it up real quick. This is the Discord, and here are just some of the people in it. We have, quite the community. Anyone in yellow is a self-tagged 3D artist. I'm telling them I'm working on this tutorial right now. We share our work in here. It's a great place to be and connect with people, and just generally meet some cool people. As well as I have a Patreon if you want to support me in any way or fashion. I actually don't know what tiers I have up right now, but yeah, it's a new thing. Not really pushing it too hard, but if you do want to give me a couple bucks, go ahead and do that, or just donate it to blender.org, because that's an even better way to support the Blender community. Okay, so what we're going to do now is let's go ahead and make this piece right here, this little tube, because we're gonna need that. Let's go ahead and select this object, cursor to selected, add in a cylinder with, on this one, let's go 12, because this is going to be a super low poly piece. Scale this down, rotate it along the y-axis to 90 degrees, move it up, and then scale it along the x-axis to about there. Let's bring it in a little bit. One trick I'll show you is if we press scale and then shift X, it'll scale along everything but the x-axis, so it won't scale in. So scale, shift X, and then we can thin it out and get a good thickness on it. Something about like that is what we're looking for. And we notice we're kind of running into a weird issue here. So what we could do is just, one, we could ignore it. Two, we could move everything down. Yeah, that seems like a solution. So let's just move everything down a little bit. That would make more sense for that stem to run under all of this. So we'll do that and then apply the scale. We're pretty much done with it at this point. But again, since we're game developers, since we care about every last poly, let's delete those faces that aren't doing anything for us, that aren't showing at all. Something else you could do is like come in here and, these are just faces, so they don't matter. We could kind of cut it off here and here, but that won't affect anything we're doing. So we're not going to do it. But okay, we're going to name this tube_LP, apply scale to everything because we care about these things. And now we're ready to work on these sort of watch hands and the glass. So we're going to start with the glass real quick because that's going to be pretty easy to do. So let's press cursor to selected, bring it into the middle of the watch here. Another thing we could do to really make sure we're in the middle is select this face, cursor to selected, and then bring in a, let's say, an icosphere. We could do a UV sphere as well, but we're going to do an icosphere. Let me just see what that looks like. Okay, we're going to bring in a UV sphere. We'll go ahead and do the UV sphere. And we'll bring down the segments to about like 17 and the rings to about 15. And then we'll go ahead and come in and delete the bottom half because we're not going to need it. We'll rotate this 90 degrees along the x-axis and then scale it down to fit roughly there. And then we can scale it along the y-axis. Kind of want to imagine that this is a piece of glass. It's not going to be too thick, so scale it even more in along the y-axis and shade smooth. And look at that. We may want to scale it up just a little bit more. And then we can put a subdivision surface modifier on there if we want to, but really don't see a need to in this case, especially with it being a game asset. We're not going to include this in the bake. There's different ways engines handle glass textures. So this is the one part of this mesh that we're actually not going to make like entirely game ready. Now it will be game ready in the sense of the poly count, and I'll show you how to do the glass, but we're going to make this look good in the Cycles render engine so we can make some cool renders for our portfolio. The way glass is handled in Unreal Engine, Godot, Unity, whatever you're using, you're going to have to do a little bit of legwork on that to figure that out. Maybe there's a really easy way I'm just not aware of, but that's that's where I'm at in my knowledge of everything. Maybe we can delete that. Yeah, we can delete that. So the way I've set it up, this is what it's going to look like. We're going to call this glass_LP, and then just move it out. Actually, we're just going to hide it. We're just going to press H, get rid of it. Let's go ahead and make sure though. Let's bring it back in. Make sure the scale is set. It's not. So we'll set the scale and apply. We're good there. So let's go ahead and then hide that. Okay, now we're going to move on to focus on the hands. So I've already created a little group here called hands_LP, which we're going to house everything in. Let's go ahead and select this face and bring our cursor to it. Cursor to selected. Let's bring in a cylinder with like 12 vertices is fine, and then we can rotate it 90 degrees along the x-axis. And since we're game developers, let's delete this back face because that's not going to be seen. We want to save on our poly count, right? Okay, so now that we have this roughly here, we'll scale it as appropriate, apply the scale. This is going to be our base for our hands to come out of. Now, the hands are not entirely like, they're not a big part of the watch. They are, but they're not going to be seen up close. That's my point. I'm not going to go for making these super intricate hands because honestly, I haven't found a good way to do that. If you know of a good way, I would love to know. But we could really focus on adding in a lot of detail here, but I want to keep things simple. And it's up to our purview and our decisions as a 3D artist as to what sort of details we're going to implement. So with that being said, I'm going to opt for something a little easier to do, something a little more beginner friendly. And I'm going to use the excuse that perhaps my viewers would prefer that, but in reality, it's probably just me. So let's go for something similar to this right here. This sort of, it comes out, has a nice circle, and then just out to a point. So let's think about how we could potentially achieve that. Okay, so to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to create a cylinder with 18 sides. And then we're going to scale it down, and of course, as usual, rotate it 90 degrees along the x-axis. And now since we're kind of going from this reference image, I'm going to stop using the one I have behind this. So we're going to hide that for a second. And we're just going to let our creative juices get flowing. How do we want this to look? Let's scale it in. I think this is probably a little too large. So let's scale it in with Shift Y so we don't affect the thickness. And if we kind of look at our reference image, these are about like half or 3/4 of the size of the base. Let's say half. So let's bring it in here and then scale S, Shift Y, bring it down to about half. And it looks like these are both about the same size. We can make some variations in a moment, but for now this will do. Let's keep it as in the center as possible for now, and let's just make one hand and then make our changes as needed. So let's see, let's rotate in edit mode, rotate along the y-axis 90 degrees so we have a flat face on the top and a flat face on the bottom. And what we'll do is we'll just extrude this to about there, and then extrude this one to about there. We can see it's pretty thick, so let's scale this in along the y-axis even more. It's going to be a pretty thin thing. And then we can delete the faces on the back because we do not need them. They will not be seen. Okay, and now with this, we can scale this one in because this is where it comes out to a defined point, and perhaps even bring it up just a little bit. I don't feel like it needs to operate like that. And then let's bring this all the way back through the entire thing, so it'll kind of be in there like that. Maybe this base does need to be a little bit larger to have room for all three hands because they're going to be on different planes. But this is going to be the minute hand, and I would like it to be in the middle. Let's scale it in just even a tad bit more and then apply the scale on these. And then with this face here, what we're going to do is inset it just to add a tiny bit of detail. This may be going a little overboard with the detail, but we're going to do it. And just like that. I think that's looking rather nice. So now we're going to duplicate it, hide that one, and then we're going to make some changes to this one. So this is going to be the hour hand. And we want it to be shorter because it's the hour hand. It's how things work for whatever reason. Let's make this one a little bit longer on the end. And I think that make that a bit shorter too. I think that looks good. So this is going to be the hour hand LP. This is going to be the minute hand LP, and this is going to be the hand base LP. And now we're ready to make the second hand, which is just going to be a much simpler version of the other two. So let's hide those. Cursor to selected. We're going to add in a plane, rotate it 90 degrees, bring it out just a little bit, scale that down quite a bit, and then scale it along the Z-axis. Scale it in even more. And then make this come to a fine point. Okay, so now let's see how that looks next to everything else. Let's kind of separate them all into their own little layers, so to speak. The hour will be on the far outside. The minute will be in the middle. And again, it's okay to eyeball this. It doesn't have to be exact. It really does not. Let's extrude this just slightly and then isolate this. Delete this back face. And then just to be safe, let's recalculate the normals by selecting everything and pressing Shift in. And we need to make sure the origins are all right here. So let's make sure our cursor is to selected. And then we're going to set the origin to the 3D cursor. Before we do that though, let's zero it out on... No, we don't want to zero it out. Yeah, let's just set the origin to the 3D cursor. Oh, that'll be fine. And now when we rotate it, it should be rotating exactly how we want it to. So there we go. Our hands are done, at least for the low poly stage of them. They're looking good. We don't really need a ton of detail in these. I mean, they're just They're just hands. So that will serve the purpose quite well. And then we have the glass already done here, so we can see at this point, let's bring back in our reference image. At this point, we are done with the low poly blockout of the watch. Let's just rename our seconds hand to second hand, or seconds hand LP. And then just like that, we have now completed our low poly blockout. We're ready to move on to making this thing look quite. Actually, I take that back. We do have one more thing to cover, but we'll actually cover that in the high poly section. We want to make some sort of reference points later. But anyways, we'll explain that later. Thanks for completing this chapter. I'll see you in chapter 4. Okay, welcome to chapter 4. We're going to tweak some things on the low poly mesh, get the shape more of how we want it. I do want to sort of change up the shape a little bit, so we're going to hide the front and then come in here to the back and make it a little more bulbous and rounded. I think that's probably a little bit more of what we're looking for. And with this, what we'll do is select these faces and then turn off proportional editing and scale them to 0 along the y-axis, so that part is completely flat. Again, once we shade this smooth, you're not going to be able to see that, but that's going to make sure we don't have any like fine point there, because that doesn't really look natural. So again, we can sort of affect the whole shape there. You know what? I'm going to undo that. This is fine. I like how this looks right now. If we put on like a subdivision surface modifier, you can see some of the shape. But again, what we're going to do is work with some bevel modifiers and stuff like that, and then also some subdivision surface modifiers. So right now I'm just sort of overviewing the mesh, seeing where potential changes could be made. A lot of the detail, I mean, we're missing a lot of the detail, obviously, but we're going to texture this in. That's the sort of the whole point, the whole purpose here. That's the approach we're going to be making. All right, there's a couple more changes we need to make, though, on the front of this thing. You see we have some like indentations. If you look at our reference images a little closer, like here, and if we do ourselves a solid now and define these lines really well, it's going to make texturing this thing so much easier. It's gonna be great with the tools Substance Painter allows us to utilize. So let's double tap G and slide this down to about there, and then something we can do is bevel that 3 times. Make sure there's an edge loop in the middle, and then take that edge loop and turn off proportional editing and bring it in just a little bit. Okay, just a little bit. We don't need a ton of detail there, but already you can see that this is where, inside of here is where our numerals are going to lie. It'll be nice for texturing, and you'll see why later. One more thing I do want to do is perhaps make this a little bit smaller. So actually what I'm going to do is scale this in. So cursor to selected, and then use the 3D cursor as the scaling point and scale this in just a little bit. I don't feel like this doesn't need to be... Oh, what are we doing here? So let's make sure we're not scaling it along the Y. Let's make sure we're not scaling it along the Y. Otherwise, you can see it kind of curves in there. So scale, Shift Y, bring it into about there. And then we may need to make some changes to this right here. We can go ahead and do that. Let's clear out the Y rotation on that, and then I'll make sure we're in wireframe so we get everything, and scale that in. Clear out the Y rotation on this one as well. Scale that in, and then same thing here, clear out the Y rotation. That one's already pretty good. And then if we want, we can just rotate these again just to have something else to look at other than them all stacked up on top of each other. Perfect. And if we look at our reference image one more time, we also have like this little area of sort of divots or grooves or whatever you want to call those. So let's go ahead and make that in actual geometry. It's going to help us out, so why not? So let's add in a loop cut, and then bevel that one time, and then bring that in just a little bit. Just extrude it in like that. And that looks awesome. We may want to sort of undo that. Maybe give us a little, well, no, we don't want to undo that. Let's just keep it how it was. In fact, we could probably bring it in just a little closer if we want to. Something like that. We could even slightly scale this. So scale it and then shift Y. So we move it on every axis but the Y. Scale it out like that. Flare it out a little bit. Let me turn on my screencast keys again. Keeps getting turned off for some reason. There we go. And there we go. I like this approach rather nicely. We're gonna have some nice texturing details in there. And at this point, we are ready to get things looking a little bit nicer. So before we continue on to like start working on the high poly, let's go ahead and shade this smooth and make sure that our sharp edges are working how they should be. So now we need to go in and mark sharp edges where we want sharp edges. So we need a sharp edge there, we need a sharp edge there. Mark sharp, sorry, mark sharp, mark sharp, mark sharp, all there. Sorry, I marked a seam. Do not mark the seam, mark sharp. And just like that, we're starting to see some definition here. And what happens if we mark sharp there? We don't want to do that. That's a seam. Mark sharp there. Yeah, we don't want that. I don't believe either. Well, what we could do is, since there is like this outer groove, we could add something like that, but we don't want to do it there. So let's clear sharp, and then perhaps here, double tap G to move this out a little bit, bevel it, and then scale it in just a little bit, and then move it just a little bit. I'm holding shift here to get finer control along the y-axis. And then we can mark sharp, and mark sharp. And that's looking good. I like that look a lot. And we'll come in, shade this smooth, add in an edge split modifier, and turn on sharp edges only. And then now we need to define where the sharps are going to be again. This is going to make more sense once we bring on textures to the low poly and everything and start doing some of the high poly stuff. But this is it's very nice to have. Don't mark seams, mark sharp. What happens if we mark sharp there? Sometimes you just want to try something and see how it looks. Maybe you like the look of that, how it's sharp. I don't quite care for it, so I'm going to keep it in that rounded, sort of obtuse shape. When we add in a subdivision surface modifier, we're going to be baking in a lot of detail, so a lot of this weird shading issues are going to go away, so we don't need to worry about it too much. Let's shade smooth, add in an edge split modifier, turn off auto smooth, mark sharp, wherever we want the sharps at. On this one, this is a pretty sharp object. This up here is an n-gon. No worries though, because it's planar. It's flat. There's nothing that needs to go into it. N-gons can be your friends. You know, a lot of people don't see it that way, but they can be. And you should utilize them in the right times at the right place. Let's go ahead and shade this smooth. Perfect. And this is already shaded smooth. So let's see, what may we want to mark sharp here? Let's add in an edge split modifier. And perhaps like this outer edge loop, we can mark that sharp. Oh yeah, it's looking good. And that's really all we're gonna need to do on this one. And I believe that about covers, oh, we got this as well. In fact, these hands as well. So let's add an edge split modifier. Mark sharp. And same thing on these guys, edge split. Shade smooth, mark sharp, see we're getting some funkiness here. This may be one of those times where using the angle split might be a little bit better. So we're going to clear those sharps, and we're just going to use the angle split, which is essentially shading this flat. be honest. It's not changing much, but that's okay. I mean, we're still not going to see. It is different in the sense that we're not seeing those, but very similar. These are low poly objects, so that will be fine. Shade smooth, edge split modifier, boom, back to where it should be. And there we go. This low poly model is pretty much prepped, and at this point we could begin working on the high poly, and then after the high poly we'll come back, do some UV unwrapping, and get ready to move this puppy into Substance Painter. At this point we are over an hour in, so thanks for sticking with us this far, and we'll continue to work in the next chapter. All right, welcome back. This is the chapter where we're going to add some high poly detail to all of this. So what we're going to do is duplicate this collection. And then we're going to hide both in the regular view, and we'll keep it in render view because we're not going to render right now. We're going to hide all that, and then with Control F2, we're going to search for _LP. Actually, we're going to search for LP.001 and replace it with high poly. Okay, we have to actually select everything to do that. And for some reason it doesn't do it for the groups, so we're going to come in and change that there. And there we go. We just renamed everything super quick. Control F2, great operator to use, and do some batch renaming. Super glad that's a feature. So now we're going to come in and we're going to start adding in some cool modifiers. Let's add in on this one a subdivision surface modifier. Really, we only need a level 1, so control 1. Then what we can do on this one is add in a bevel modifier. Let's delete this edge split. We're not going to need it. Change it to weight. And then if we select the edge and go to mean bevel weight, this is where we can apply the mean bevel weight let's bring this down to about 0.003. So we're selecting the edges we previously had sharp, and we're adding in a mean bevel weight to them. And we're going to do that of like 0.002, and that looks fine. Then we can add in a subdivision surface modifier on top of that. We're getting some weird pinching up here, so what we're going to do is we're going to inset that quite a bit. Oh, let me undo that. Inset it to about there. And we don't need a bevel. And we don't need that as sharp, so we can Control E, clear sharp. I think that looks fine, and a lot of the detail on a lot of these parts we're going to texture in. So if we just sort of compare this to the low poly right now, that's the difference. It still pretty much maintains the same shape. We're going to see we potentially might have some baking issues in here, but we're going to sort of play it as we go and see where it might take us. You never want to have the subdivision above the bevel modifier. You're going to get some crazy results. So keep it below. And if we want to bring this in a little bit, help with those potential baking issues, we can. But with that bevel modifier, it's going to be interesting. So let's try to keep this pretty low, maybe 0.001. Anything we can do to try to match the silhouette as much as we can is going to help us when we go to bake. Okay, so just so you know, limit method weight, miter outer, we'll just use sharp. Anyways, weight 0.001, offset on the edges, and we've marked those in edit mode with the mean bevel weight on the edges data. That's pretty much the process we're going to repeat here for a lot of this, so just buckle up, get ready to do it. And we might even add in a bevel modifier here above the subdivision surface, and again, weight, and then select these and add in a mean bevel weight. And it's not doing anything. Oh, let's also come into segments and add in 3 segments. There we go. That makes it look a lot better. So let's change this bevel just a little bit. Yeah, let's do 3 segments, change it to like 0.002. So that's something we want to do across the board, have the segments. Delete that edge split modifier. We're not going to need it on any of the high poly. And change that to maybe 0.002 and then turn on that subdivision surface modifier. It's going to give us a little more sort of curvature data to bake in on those ends. All right, delete the edge split modifier. Add in a bevel modifier with weights, and again, anywhere we marked sharp is pretty much a good rule of thumb. We need some bevel weight data there, so let's add that in. And once we've added in a few, then we can change segments to 3, maybe go to 0.002 like we have with the others, and just continue this all around. And again, most of the time I use a different workflow for this. I'm using hard ops and box cutter, and it makes it super quick. It does most of the stuff for you when you click a button. But we're trying to keep this beginner friendly. People that haven't spent any money, people that maybe don't know if they like Blender yet, people just learning the basics without a budget. So I'm going pure vanilla, and it does take a little bit longer. There's a lot of add-ons that save your time. I just noticed we're also going to need to add in the bevel weight data over on that side, and then there we go. Again, let's sort of just switch between the two. Yeah, we're maintaining the silhouette, so that's good. That's something we have to watch out for. All right, delete edge split, add in a bevel, 0.002, 3 segments, limit to weights. Anywhere we have that, put a bevel on it. Let's hide the glass, it's in our way. Mean bevel weight. And just like that, oh, we need one there as well. Just like that, we've got it. Now add in a subdivision surface modifier to clean it up a bit. This one we're going to go to like level 2. As much as your computer can handle, really. You don't want to go crazy with it, but just gives you more detail to bake in, so no worries there. We're getting some pinching back here. So what can we do to potentially fix this pinching? I believe that is caused from the subdivision surface modifier. So we could forego using that, but I don't really want to. Something we could do is delete that and then do a grid fill, and then sort of keep it like that, but that adds some stuff too. You know, we're going to table that for now. I'll try to do my best and figure out how to fix it. What if we just fill it with an N-gon? Nope. Same sort of pinching. What if we do that? Okay, now look at that. Pretty much gone. Pretty much gone. So that's what we're going to do. We'll see if that is the sort of flat area is included in our bake later. Okay, now let's go to the minute hands. And again, we're just going to have to repeat this for everything, but due to this being a beginner level tutorial, I'm going to walk you through most of it. Mean bevel weight, 3.002. Add in a subdivision surface modifier. Add in a bevel modifier. And I got to figure out how we're going to do this here, because there is going to be some pinching on that. You know what we may do is we may just avoid baking the hands, because really the hands aren't going to have any, really too much detail. They're going to be so small. We may just kind of hold off on that, keep the edge split modifiers on them, and then bake basically that onto that. And honestly, we don't even want to really include this in most of our bake, because it's going to include some ambient occlusion stuff. And if we're going to animate this, we don't want ambient occlusion baked in, which we don't have to bake ambient occlusion anyways. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. Just anticipating problems that may arise. I have modeled this watch once before, but it has been a couple of weeks, and we have made some changes since when I first modeled it. All right, the glass high poly, we can add in a modifier, but we're also not including that in the export or the bake. But let's just go ahead and see what we've got, sort of assess everything. I think the high poly is pretty much done, and now it's just down to UV unwrapping the low poly and exporting both of these out into Substance Painter to continue the texturing process. So thank you for watching this chapter. I will see you in the next one, and we'll do some UV unwrapping, everyone's favorite part. Welcome to the next chapter. In this one, we're going to start UV unwrapping the low poly version of the watch. So let's go ahead and pop over here to this collection and hide the glass for now. Let's start off with the main body. So let's just isolate it, and actually let's go into this UV editing window first. Let me turn on my screencast keys here so we can see those. And what we're going to do is hide that with T, because we don't really need it right now. And let's select this edge loop. First of all, let's just isolate this so we can just focus on the body. Let's mark a seam there, and then press unwrap. Select everything, unwrap. And this is what we currently have. Now I want to go ahead and enable something called display stretch. And basically the dark blue is the minimum amount of stretching that we have, and then anything lighter than that, and I'll show you, for example, if we stretch this out here, it'll start to turn different colors. We want to stay as close to blue, dark blue, as we possibly can. So we're going to add in some more seams here. We're going to add in a seam there, and we're going to turn on this UV sync selection here so we can keep this up, and then unwrap that again and see what we're left with. That's actually not what we wanted to do, so let's clear that seam, select this edge loop, and then mark a seam, and then unwrap that. So now we are left with this interior section, which I am then actually going to amend just a little bit. We're going to clear that seam and mark another seam there and unwrap it. And we're left with a little bit of stretching here, but that's okay. It's not going to be a big deal. But just know that the more stretching we have, the more distorted the textures will be. And typically, you want to try to avoid stretching as much as possible. Now, actually, with what we have here, it's pretty decent. We're going to keep this for now. What we're going to do is we're going to take these UVs and we're going to move them to the top, get them out of the way. That'll serve us for later. Now let's go and choose another object to work on the UV unwrapping process for. So we're already done with the first one. See, it wasn't that bad after all. UV editing isn't really that bad. So let's see how we may want to unwrap this. First, I think we're going to want to put a seam on the top so we can unwrap that, and that is this part. And then probably on the side, which we actually don't have a loop cut going around the entire way, so we can go ahead and add that in. And now that we added it in, we can just deselect these top ones and mark a seam, and then unwrap. And we can see the shape is kind of starting to come through, but it's still pretty, pretty messed up looking. So let's go ahead and put another seam there and see what we're left with. Still left with some strange stretching, getting a little stretched out in some parts, but for now, that's going to do. This is such a small part. You kind of have to pick and choose your battles when it comes to, the stretching you're comfortable with keeping and not keeping, etc., etc. So let's go ahead and put a seam here on this. There's a reason for that, and I'm going to show you why later in the process. But then let's come to the right orthographic view. And again, we don't have, typically what I like to do is have a seam on the side, but we're going to take this seam right here and mark that. And then now we're left with this, which is perfectly straight. It actually worked out really well for us. So we're going to keep it as that. And this is going to be pretty instrumental having this straight piece. But let's assume for a minute it's not straight like this right here, but we need it to be straight to assist us in the texturing process later. What we could do is let's manipulate the vertices on this and turn on snapping, and then G and then like X, and then G and then Y, and then G and then Y, and then G and then X. And then if we select everything, or if we select this selection with this as the active face, we could go to unwrap, follow active quads, length average. And now it's going to straighten that out. But notice it's going to have some weird stretching, and it straightened everything out. We don't need it for that purpose, so we're going to undo all that. because we would rather just keep it how it is. So let's unwrap that and put another seam there, another seam there, and then another seam. We can go pretty heavy on the seams on this one. And there we go. Everything looks good. The more seams we add, the less stretching we're going to have, but the more visible seams we're going to have. So it's a trade-off. It's not something that... It's something you have to figure out through the process and just through experience of what you may be okay with accepting as far as stretching goes. We're going to add a seam here on this one. Just deselect those with middle click, mark the seams, and then as well as these faces here. Mark the seam, or this edge loop rather, not a face. Mark the seams and then unwrap. And that's pretty good. Do we want another seam on here? Will that help? Not really. So we're going to clear that seam and unwrap that. And then for some reason it is not letting me move this over here. Oh, because I have vertex snapping on. Let's turn that off. And there we go. We got some seams. Okay, so we've UV unwrapped that, we've UV unwrapped that, and that. It's all looking pretty good. Looks like all we have left really is the watch hands. This is actually much easier than anticipated. So let's add a seam here, and then one seam on the top. Actually, you know what? Let's put it on the bottom because it's less likely to be visible from the bottom. That looks good. And then with the hands, what I'm going to do is maybe project from view. That may be the move. It's going to have some stretching here and then on the sides because the way we're projecting it, like the textures are going to look really, really bad on the sides. But okay, so what I may do here is actually just select the everything forward facing and then project from view. And then Control I. Okay, hold on, no, we need that face as well. Project from view, and then Control I to inverse the selection. Everything else that's not forward facing. Oh, okay. And then unwrap. So this part is going to get unwrapped naturally. Let's Control I this again, hide those, and then set some seams in here so the stretching isn't as bad. Okay, so we'll mark some seams there. We'll mark some seams there. We'll put one seam here. Two more seams there. And then more seams there. Let's unwrap that. Okay, looking a lot better. And then if we Alt-H to bring everything back into the folds. And press L to moderate our selections here. Maybe we can just select all these. This is going to be way less visible, so I'm going to shrink that down. And then select everything and move it out here. So that's one done. Let's do the same thing for this one, basically everything forward facing. And when UV unwrapping, I'm kind of glossing over what this actually is if you're a complete beginner. But I'm gonna assume that you have at least a little bit of experience with UV unwrapping, and there's so many other better tutorials out there that'll explain exactly what it is. But it's essentially laying out a 3D object into 2D space and telling Blender how to deal with that. Okay, so we're gonna hide those, do the same things, add in the seams in the exact same spots. And this is like some hacks, it's makes life easier when you can project some stuff from view, especially when it's going to be so small and unnoticeable. You don't have to kill yourself with all these seams. Okay, so now we can scale this down. Alt-H, bring it all back in. Move that down there. And you'll understand why I'm moving it off the screen in a second, but you're going to be glad you did if you have been following along. All right, we're going to project this from view, and then hide, and then mark a seam there, and we'll mark a seam there, unwrap, and then Alt-H, bring it all back in. We'll make this significantly larger than these, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Bring it out there. Okay, cool. So what do we have left? What's not? Let's select everything and just see what's going on. It looks like everything's UV unwrapped, so that's good. Looks like I forgot to move some things out of the middle here. Looks like maybe that. Move that over there, and that's why we wanted to move it out of the middle. I did not UV unwrap the tube, so I need to grab the tube and mark a seam, unwrap, move that down there. And then this maybe is the one yep, that's the one I forgot. Okay, move it over there. All right, in that case, we'll select everything. We'll hide our reference image. We don't need it right now. And we need to start allocating this into the 2D space and figuring out how much textile density each part needs. How much real estate does it need? The more real estate, the more highly defined the textures can be in the space. So obviously, our major piece is this one right here. And that's the one we're going to want most, if not like all of the space for. So what we'll do is we'll bring this down here. And that already, takes up a good majority of it. And then for this, we can actually, this is a less important part because it's not going to have much on it. We can actually just shrink this down. And we need to be careful not to get too close to these edges because there's going to be some bleeding potentially. But something like that will work. So now we just need to figure out, basically it's a puzzle at this point, and it's just a matter of matching them in together. So I'm going to go ahead and time-lapse this portion of the tutorial because it's really just a jigsaw puzzle. And you can see exactly how I do it. You can try to match it. But at the end of the day, it's just fitting in the pieces where they fit. So my commentary is not going to add much value here today. Yeah, one thing I do want to add here is with this piece, which if we go look at what this piece is, it's this right here. Okay, no, it's not. This is the piece right here. We need to keep this as straight as we possibly can. So I'm going to take extra care not to rotate this, or if I do, rotate it by 90 degrees only. And you'll see why when we're in Substance Painter. Okay, so I am done UV unwrapping the model. It's not the best UV unwrap. There's obviously a lot of wasted space, but it's being done by hand, being done by a human. It's not being packed in by a UV packing add-on, so there's going to be wasted space. That's just the way it is. I'm satisfied with this. I'm excited to see how it bakes out, and if it is good enough, you'll note that there's one thing not included in this UV unwrap, which is the glass. Okay, if that's something you know how to get into your game engine and texture appropriately, and you can make it all in the same material, go ahead and do that. However, for this purpose, we're going to be utilizing separate materials for the glass, so it's not going to be included in this. If that's something you have the foresight to know if you want, then go ahead and include it in the UV unwrap, make some space for it, and proceed appropriately. Otherwise, you can just continue following on as normal, and we'll move on to the next chapter where we get this ready for export. We export it out and prepare it for Substance Painter. So very quickly, before we get this ready to export, we're going to want to check something, and that's our normals. Okay, what is a normal? A normal is what tells the 3D software, whether that's Substance Painter, Blender, whatever it is, which way the face is facing, which way to have the light reflect off of it. So in order to visualize this, let's go into edit mode, and I turned it on, so let me turn it off. You go up here to this arrow, and then click on this right here, display normals, and you can change the size in which they are displayed. Now we'll make them pretty small so it's easy to see, but these are examples of correctly facing normals. Now if we look up here, it appears to be the same. So we're going to select everything and press Shift-N to recalculate normals. And Blender does a pretty good job of calculating it themselves. But sometimes, you may have to go in and press Alt-N to flip the normals yourself. Now this is what something would look like if a normal was set up incorrectly. And if we come in here, the normal's facing the right way. So if something like that happens, press Shift-In, recalculate, or flip it yourself. But this is a good way to visualize which way your normals are facing and know if you have a problem, because this is something you need to figure out before you export, or it's going to cause you a lot of issues down the road. Okay, time to prepare our meshes for export, get them out of Blender into Substance Painter. All right, so what we're going to do is select everything in the low poly collection aside from the glass. Make sure our scale has been applied. In my case, it has been. Go to Export FBX, and then just export it to wherever you want. Make sure you limit to selected objects, only export the mesh, and make sure you're applying the modifiers upon export. Now it's going to take a second. And one thing I do want to do is go ahead and decrease my subdivisions on my entire thing to 1, because I've already done an export to Substance Painter and I've seen what the bake looks like. I think it'll look a little bit better if we use a subdivision of 1, and I'll explain why that is once we're in Substance Painter. But let's go ahead and redo that export since I just changed that. And it may take a second. That's okay. It's a lot of polys to condense down. And then we'll go into the low poly, we'll hide the glass, and we'll do the same thing, except we're going to call this one low. And if you've watched my Katana course before, we're not going to bake a cage. It's something you can do, but for a model like this, we're not going to do it. We're just going to use some bake parameters in Substance Painter. So in the next chapter, we'll be in Substance Painter and start working on setting up the workspace for texturing. Okay, I would like to make note in this chapter that I am using a version of Substance Painter that is not the newest. I purchased Substance Painter on Steam before Adobe acquired them, and I have not upgraded because I've heard bad things about the current build. Those may have been resolved by now, I don't know. But nonetheless, we're going to be using this version of Substance Painter, and you should be able to follow along with any version newer than this one. It has to include geometry masking because we're not baking ID maps. That's something you can do, but instead we're going to be doing it this way. So come up to New Project, select a file, low, and then document resolution 4096. We'll do 4K. We can always downscale later if needed, but I like to work in 4K. All right, so you can immediately see here, this is not a Substance Painter tutorial. I'm going to try to make it as beginner-friendly as possible. But as far as learning the interface, go look up some other tutorials for that, get a basic understanding of what you're dealing with, and I'll try my best, but I am not prepared to make that sort of video at this moment for Substance Painter. You use like left Alt, and then left click to rotate, middle mouse button to pan, right to zoom. You have different views here, 3D and 2D, 3D only, 2D only. We're going to do both for now. And we're going to come over to texture set settings and then bake mesh maps and then do 4096. We are going to not bake ID. Okay, we can bake ambient occlusion. I was going to say let's not do that. We can do that, but with the mindset of it's only for visualization purposes and we're not going to use it in any actual texture sets. And the reason for that will be made clear pretty soon. So let's go ahead and change the match types to LP and high P, and then match by mesh name. And then for the max frontal distance to 0.005, and then max radius 0.005. These are kind of like boilerplate values I start with to see what the bake looks like. And honestly, I mean, I'm not an expert at baking, so I'm not the person to explain what all these values mean. I just kind of found some numbers that tend to work for me, and I stick with them. So now we're going to let the bake do its thing, and you can see the ambient occlusion pass that just happened. And I'm going to isolate that map here in a second to show you what I'm talking about. But if we go in and we look at AO, we see it has some ambient occlusion. It looks pretty good. I mean, there's some areas it's kind of sharp. Overall, it looks fine. The problem with this is it's baking in some shadows, right? But these hands may turn in an animation. So if you're planning on animating this in any way, you can't use it because those shadows will be baked in there when in reality, those hands are going to move. Something you could do is take the hands out and bake them separately, but that's just going beyond the scope of this tutorial. So we're going to keep this map for now, but with the understanding that if you want to use it for a game, you either have to figure out a different solution or just not use the ambient occlusion layer. So we'll go back to the material tab and we'll go ahead and save this project as Pocket Watch Tutorial. And there's a couple of things that I already have in my Substance Painter shelf, some smart materials and stuff like that you're not going to have. I'm going to do my best to include absolutely everything I can in the description, in the course material. But in the event that I forget something, because I've had these installed for a long time, I don't remember which is vanilla or not, you may have to go to substanceshare.com and go find the ones that I'm using. Substance Share, just Google Substance Share, make an account, download some smart materials. But I will do my best to include everything down below. And if I forget anything, point it out to me and I can update the course material. So there's a couple of masks, though, we want to bring in that I've already made. That's going to save you a lot of time, a lot of heartache, and a lot of struggle in Photoshop. But I made these in Photoshop last time I made the watch, and we're going to use these to help with the texturing process as well as the text. I'm using the word avventura, which is Italian and Romanian for adventure. Instead of using the word quartz, you can put whatever you want there, make your own alphas, whatever you want. For a prefix, we're just going to put watch so we can easily search it. And I don't know if it's case sensitive, so we're going to go under case and then import resources. I'm just going to import it into the project. You can do your shelf and have these available forever. I'm just going to do the project shelf because I don't want them forever. Okay, now that I've done that, if we type in watch, we will have everything we need right here. This watch material is actually left over from the last time I made the watch. We're not going to use that. We're going to build our own using existing smart materials within Substance Painter. So the very first thing we can go ahead and do is try to plop on a smart material. Now this is bronze armor, and I will include this in the course material. I don't know if it's vanilla or not, but bronze armor is sort of the base we're going to be using. And let's go ahead and observe our bake. Here we can see a seam. Now this seam, it's unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get rid of it. However, at a distance, you can't really see it. But this is the seam we placed in Blender. That's how they represent themselves in reality. And we can see that thanks to like some of the curvature maps that bake, it knows where to place. The smart material has curvature layers that's already like adding in dirt underneath these watch hands. And so this kind of actually looks a little weird because these things would theoretically be moving and not have much dirt under them. But since they're static in our mesh, that's just the way Substance Painter is handling it. And we can do some stuff to fix that later. But overall, just observing the bake, it actually came out really, really well. So I don't see any major glaring issues. Maybe a few teeny ones about. But just so you know, if we had not dropped that subdivision surface down to 1, let me go ahead and visualize with you what that would have done. I think this will be a helpful exercise in understanding why I decreased that to 1 before exporting. Let's bring it back up to 3. Export the entire thing again. I'm going to call it high 2 at this point. Export it out. And then I'll just change it back to 1. Oh. Just change it back to 1 for now. And then save that. And then let's go ahead and redo our bake. But instead, we're going to use high 2. Oh, you know what? I don't even know if we ever baked, did we? I didn't have that. Okay, maybe we did. Okay, let's bake that. And we will look at the difference. You see that outline, it doesn't exactly follow. You see that black. That's a sort of a problem. I may not even have baked with the high poly in the first place because I'm already noticing some differences like this nick here. It's a baking issue. So I'm going to go ahead and redo the bake with the original high poly and see how it looks. And if it's bad, we'll pause the video and figure out what's going on and try to fix it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share what I've changed here. I went ahead and baked with the initial export with all the subdivisions at 1, and then I changed the max funnel distance to 0.01 and everything like that. We're still seeing these black edges, and unfortunately at this point, with my understanding of how baking works in Substance Painter, this is going to be unavoidable because this silhouette from our low poly to high poly is different enough that, I mean, this is the high poly bake versus the low poly. So if this is a major issue for you, you would want to increase the cylinder count when you bring in a cylinder and make it more refined. However, at the distance it's going to be viewed at, even in a player's hand in a game, you can see it represented up here as well. This is not a big enough issue for me to go back and redo it. But I wanted to make you aware of it, so if you see these issues, you actually know what's going on. And someone more experienced with baking, perhaps you can comment down below and let me know what I did wrong and how to fix these issues more easily. But anyways, this concludes this chapter where we brought it in from Blender, baked it, got a smart material on there, and then in the next chapter, we're going to continue texturing this thing, breathing life into the mesh, giving it a character of its own, and working on that. So thank you for watching thus far. See you in the next one. All right, welcome back to the next chapter. We're going to continue texturing this pocket watch. It's a few days later for me, so I'll try to remember where we left off at and get us going in a good spot. So let's go ahead and start off with some geometry masking. Now, if you're using a newer version of Substance Painter, you can click on this little square right here and then start like masking out different things based on the geometry, which is what I really like about these newer versions of Substance Painter. So we can sort of exclude the watch hands from this bronze armor smart material. And just like that, it no longer has the material. So that's, yeah, really cool. We're going to continue to do that in a few different ways. We're going to add a black mask to the bronze armor material and then use this polygon select tool to mask out some other areas. So actually, let's make this a white mask. So we're going to invert the mask and then come into, let's see, 3D and 2D, and then we're going to add this area here to not include the bronze armor, as well as this area right here. So you could do it on the 3D view, but I'm going to show you some issues that you may face if you do it like that. It goes through the mesh. So I like to do it in the 2D view whenever I can. It makes it a little bit easier. So that's why we did it that way. And here we can see the ambient occlusion has been baked into this. So again, it's one of the limitations of the way we've done this. It's just something we're going to have to deal with for this tutorial. But again, other ways to do that. So now that we've done that, let's see what should be next. First off, since it's been a few days, let me pull up my PureRef and open up my project. Okay, so here we are. This is what we're trying to go for most closely here. You know, it's white in the middle, sort of has this gold here, and then it appears to be bronze or some other metal around everything else. So there's going to be multiple different textures. So, you know, we could start with adding in some gold. So let's see if we have like a gold smart material to work with. Maybe gold damage will be good. Yeah, you know, I think that will work. Now again, we're probably going to want to mask out this area as well on that. So let's add in a black mask and actually just choose where this is going to go, because it's not going to go in as many places. Let's see. Add in a white mask. Okay, since this is actually, if we put this on top and then invert the mask, let's clear it. And now we should be able to add it in just here. So let's do it on the 2D view again. Let's just add it in these areas. And we're using the polygon select tool for this, so we can get very precise areas of where this texture needs to be. Okay, And we'll take it up here on this ring as well. So you can kind of select it. Just be careful not to select too much. And this is just to roughly block it out. We can change the way this looks later. You know, it looks okay. It doesn't look amazing right now, but that's okay. All right, let's put that below the bronze armor, and then now let's put it above for now since we just did that. Let's see here. Let's try to change this gold pure base color to maybe be a little bit lighter to match in with our reference a little bit more. Something like that will do for now. Let's come back into the bronze armor. Let's just call this watch body, and then we'll call this gold rim. So in the watch body, let's come in and let's see, we'll add a, it already has an edge damage. Okay, so we can kind of see that the edges are being damaged. Let's ramp this up quite a bit. So come into the mask editor and let's see what we can do here, because it's not really, it doesn't look too damaged, which we would like that to be even more. We want this thing to look like it's been through a lot. Let's keep the blur down and just kind of mess with this until we get something that works for what we're going for. I'm going to go ahead and hide the gold rim for now. This really is not behaving like I would like it to. Let's brighten up the underlying material there. Something's probably wrong with our bake to be getting these weird results. See, it's coming through here, but I would expect this to be a little more intense on some of these edges. Let's see what it looks like up here. It looks like it's working. Okay, we're going to come back to this part, but at least we know the edge damage is working. So one thing we can go ahead and do is come into, let's change our camera to an orthographic view. And let's add in a new paint layer. Actually, let's add in a fill layer. Typically I like to work with fill layers and then just add a black mask on it. And then come into our alphas and look for watch. We're going to get the watch mask that I've made for us. And we're going to have to increase the scale of this to about maybe 150 or 120. We're going to have to add this above the gold rim. Okay, let's clear the mask. Change this to a really dark color so we can see it. And then see how that may look. Now we're really going to have to work on centering this as well as we can. I think that looks pretty good. So we went to orthographic view so we could not have any perspective. And then if you hold down Alt and then Shift and then left mouse wheel, it'll snap you to the front view. So that'll give you a lot of control over where you place this texture. So now that we've got that, let's turn off the metallic, and for the height, and turn off the normal as well. We don't have any normal data we want to pass in. On the height, let's decrease this, and this is going to, you can either increase it to make it look like it's embedded out. If we take the height down to about negative 0.17, it'll give us that little inset. And then for the base color, we don't want it to be pure black. We could just lighten that up to a gray, and then something like that. And now we can call this watch lettering. And just keep that above the gold rim so we can have that in there just like so. And now we'll add in another fill layer, make it black, add a black mask. And now this is the part where I can't give you these alphas, but you're gonna have to go find some decorative alphas, and I'll include the link if I can find it for the ones that I have. It's not the JRO pack that I was just looking at, but it's these decorative alphas right here. And this is gonna allow us to basically make these stamps right on there. I'll show you what it looks like once we increase the height on these. But it's going to look like that. And we're not going to have any color data, I don't believe, on this. If we do, it'll be like a brighter color or something like that. And we're going to add in these stencils all the way around this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and just time lapse this part of the process. You can watch, see how I do it, find some alphas of your own. This is going to be entirely like, just find something that kind of looks good to the eye, and just, make sure you have, like, these are all the alphas I'm going to use. And then just go around and texture it up. So we're going to time lapse this part, and I'll be back when I'm done. I'm going to do this in orthographic view and also ensure to turn on mirroring, so I only have to do it once and it will be applied to both sides. Okay, so that about covers it for the stenciling I'm going to do. Now, it's not the craziest stencil in the world, but it'll work for this purpose. We'll call it engravings. We'll turn off symmetry, and then we'll come in here and probably turn off the metallic and roughness and normal values. And then with the color, we can just sort of play around, try to get something that doesn't cause too much attention, but also like is showcasing, is obviously like some cool engravings and gives it some nice color. So something about this, this color with the height. Satisfied with that. I think it'll work for this, especially for what we're going to be using it for. So all is well. Now let's go ahead and we're going to put this inside the watch body, and we'll pop this down and just see how these different values may affect it. So if we bring it any lower below base color, the height will still be there, but the color won't. So we're going to put it about right there, versus if we have it all the way at the top, we can see there's slight changes. It's kind of hard to tell, but essentially all the layers, if it's below everything, the dirt will be affecting it, etc., etc. So that's about where we want it. Things are looking good right there. And yeah, now we can move on to adding a little bit more detail. I think it's looking a little too clean. So what we're going to do is come in, add in another fill layer, and then a black mask, and then with a dirt brush, let's turn back on symmetry. I'll show you what we're going to be doing here. Let's move it down to about here. Okay, so basically we notice that it's not really placing it exactly where we want, so we got to turn down the jitter. So the position jitter we're going to put to 0, and we'll allow it to jitter a little bit on the size and the flow, and the angle, just to give it some variation. But other than that, we're going to want this below the engravings as well. And we're just going to come in here, and you'll understand why we're doing this once we're done. But we're just going to come and color sort of this in a little bit. Something about like that for now. Let's go ahead and turn off the all values besides roughness. We're going to make this a little rougher to act as if this is like a worn down area. And then on the color, we can come in and make it pretty dark. Maybe add some more there. And then on the color normal values, we can lower the intensity a bit. It's not meant to have a ton of colors, so maybe something just a little dark. And then come in and clean up. Bring it just to the edge of this outer rim. It's okay if it bleeds over a little bit, but we're just imagining that a lot of dirt has, and then we can come in and press X and go the other way and take down the flow a little bit so it's not full opacity, and just sort of touch it up as we go across to make it a little less uniform. Now let's undo it and see if that adds anything. I think it is, to an extent. I may want to make it a little bit darker and then actually come and bring it in the color and just make it like a darker brownish orange. Affect the color a little bit. So for now, I think that's all right. It's definitely adding like almost like some dirt values, which is exactly what we want. Let's see what happens if we increase the height of it. That kind of gives it, if it's like a really low height value, I think it's just toggle height. I think that does add something to it. So we'll give it a really low height value in the positive or the negative, whatever you think looks better. And yeah, so that covers pretty much that part. Let's go ahead and add some engravings to the back of it. Now I'm going to include a stencil in the course material that you're free to use. Essentially, I'm just going to put like a word back here to indicate the watch maker, but you're free to make your own stencil in Photoshop, of course, and then add it in. All right, I'll go ahead and show you exactly how I plan to make this stencil, just in case you don't know. We have a black background and then a white foreground, and we're just going to put whatever word we want here. On the first watch I made, I actually put my name. On this one, I'm going to put subscribe, because that's something you should totally do to get some more Blender content. And join the Discord, which is down below. We got a ton of great 3D artists in there. Way more skilled than I. And let's go find a cool font for this. So something like this script, I actually really like the look of. And then we can increase the spacing to make it a little more readable. Like, let's try 0. Okay, let's try 5 or 15. All right, we'll settle on 25. We'll call it a day. And just like that, we have some cool vintage looking text. We'll save it as a JPEG. We'll call it subscribe. Now all we have to do is drag it into our shelf, add it as an alpha, and we'll give it the prefix of watch, and we'll just import it into the project for now. Don't plan on using this down the road. And let's add in another fill layer, call it engraving. I'm going to call it subscribe, because that's what it says. Call it whatever you want. We'll give it a really big negative height value for now. Make sure we're in orthographic view, which I don't think we are. Okay, maybe we are. And then just come into the mask, make sure that's our selected one, turn off symmetry, and stamp it on the back. Now, if you get that result, that means your angle jitter is set up. So if we just turn the angle jitter down to 0, and the position jitter to 0, and the flow jitter to 0, and the size jitter to 0, we're going to get exactly where we place it. So make sure your jitter is turned off. And there we go. Subscribe. Let's decrease the height a little bit. Maybe give it a color, like just a darker color to add some contrast in there. Do something like that. And then for the roughness, you can also just decrease, we'll increase the roughness. Perhaps there's some dirt that got stuck up in there. So there we go. We've added a word to the back. And yeah, now at this point, we should probably start focusing on the interior. Actually, we need to add some more details, I think, to this rim. So we can do that next. The way we're going to do that is come up to the gold rim, and just like before, add in a fill layer. Imagine that. Now add in a black mask per usual, and for this, we're going to use a brush basic soft. We'll see what soft looks like. No, we're going to use basic hard. And there we go. Let's turn on symmetry, come up to the top, and place one down. And then let's increase the height. Let's only have it affect the height for right now. We can add in some more detail later. And then basically we're just going to be very careful to try to maintain the spacing around this. And we're just going to go around and give it this little, if we look at our reference image, sort of has these little blocks. We're going to make them circles just to make it a little easier. And I think it looks, it has its own style. So we'll just do this all the way around. And it's kind of, you're going to have to control Z a little bit. It's not super precise. If you have a tablet, it may make it a little easier. Texturing with the tablet and Substance Painter is pretty cool sometimes, depending on what you're doing. You can get a lot of cool, refined, hand-drawn detail in there. And we'll just go all the way. And you kind of have to maintain your spacing, and then at the end, hopefully, we may run into an issue at the end. If you can guess what it may be, extra points for you. And you can tell that texturing is not my strongest suit, because this chapter is likely, this whole section is likely a lot shorter than the actual modeling section. But honestly, this section is just here, just so you can get some textures in there and just show you the very, very basics. So yeah, you see the issue we've ran into. We may have to back it up a little bit and sort of compensate a little bit up here by spacing them just ever so slightly close together. Let's just see how that looks. Looks fine. I mean, you can go back and redo it if that spacing bothers you. It doesn't bother me enough to do that though. All right, let's give it a color, sort of a, it's on this gold after all, so let's give it kind of like a brighter color and maybe slightly less roughness. So there we go. We have this sort of detail in here. And now we can start on the interior of the watch face. And at this point, we're kind of getting close to that finished point. We're not going to take it too much further than this. There's tons of things you could do to improve this. This is it's a pretty basic texture, but again, not a Substance Painter or texturing expert. We'll call this, I'm just saving it right now, and we'll call this dots. Let's go ahead and bring it below everything, so it's being affected by everything else. And now we can focus on the interior here. So what we're going to do, let's see if we have any smart materials we can start from. Last time I used this stylized material, and I think I quite liked it. So we'll pop it in on the bottom. And then when it comes to the base, we'll just give it a kind of a white to gray texture. And for the edges, sort of a dark gray. For the cavity, again, sort of dark gray. Color variation, sort of a white type. And then for this one, let's give it kind of a slightly white to blue. And then for this AO bake, give it a white, or kind of a gray, my bad. For edge highlights, a brighter white. And then for the edge textures, or the texture details, something like that. So let's brighten this up a little bit. I feel like this is still a little too dark. So we'll just keep in here, bringing in the brightness up a little bit on everything until we are happy. Let's go ahead and on the stylized material, add in a geometry mask and take out the hands, because this is not going to include the hands. This is just the thing behind it. And we'll just put this on the body. And we don't need a mask on this because everything else is above it and it's already masking downward. So something like that will be fine for right now. And then let's assume these are sort of plastic sort of hands. So Let's see, we have several smart materials we can utilize. See what this one looks like. Add in a geometry masking to only be on the hands and the base. Change this to be a sort of black texture. I actually don't know if I like that. Let's take a look at our reference image and try to determine exactly what that may be. Looks like it is a plastic sort of material, but it's much glossier than this. And we're also kind of going for this right here. These are metal. So you know what? We may just go with a metal instead of a plastic. That's more likely what a high-end vintage watch would be using anyways. So let's see what kind of metals we have access to. Okay, let's see about copper. Maybe this one will suit us well. That ain't bad. And remember, this black is due to the silhouette on the bake being different, and it's not going to be fixable unless you just have a higher quality base mesh. Okay, copper worn. I like the look of that quite a bit. So we'll use this one. And then for the gold rim, let's come back in here and go to the mask and select that and that to replicate our reference image here. Then come down to the copper and see maybe what changes we want to make to the color. Maybe give it a more golden looking feel. Quite like that a lot. Let's go ahead and add in our text. So we'll come up to the stylized material, add in a fill layer. We'll make it black. Add in a black mask. And then if we come and search for the stencil I provided, called Aventura. And again, this is for adventure. Come into our brush, scale that up. We can just sort of make sure we're in orthographic view, stamp that on, maybe right there. And then just sort of inset it just a little bit with the height. Just like that. I mean, you could definitely come in here and give it more TLC, but I think we're looking pretty good overall. I think this is we've definitely leveraged smart materials quite a bit, which again, I just have to be completely forthcoming. My ability, I'm still a novice in Substance Painter, so this is how I would go about making it. And let me go ahead and save this. I'll show you before we move on to going back into Blender to like finish everything up. I will show you the original watch I made, which I actually think is a little better than this one. Here is the original one I made. You can see the hands were not included. This is how I made the approach. You can see it looks very similar, maybe a little more edge wear. You can tweak those values. Oh, we also want to do the notches. Okay, that's one more thing we do not want to forget to do. Do the notches on this. And then you can see my name there on the back. So let's go back to our projects. And before we move on to the next chapter, which will be exporting, we will add in the notches. You can see the model even differs from the first time I did it. Just based on the approach I took this time. Okay, so basically on our reference images, we have some notches here, and we didn't model those in. You could have done that, but we did not because we're trying to save on poly counts, and this is why I made that section right here super straight, so we can have an easy time texturing it. So let's add in another fill there, and another black mask. Just like before, let's go find an alpha that will fit our needs. We need a square, essentially. So let's see if we have anything. Okay, here's one, a square rectangle. Oop, I accidentally undid the black mask. Let's make sure our rotation is set to 0. And increase the size until it takes up the entire section here. It's a little thick. Let me see what we can do about that. And tweak the size of it. Maybe be like 0.33. Yeah, there we go. And then if we increase the position or the flow jitter to like 100, let's say 200. It doesn't let us go above 100. Let's increase the spacing. Spacing is what we need, not the flow jitter. Let's increase the spacing to 40. Okay, so now let's clear this mask. We've tested our spacing out. Perfect. All right, we're going to place 1 at the top. Say 1 right here. And then utilizing, okay, we actually have to zoom out. It's a little funky to do this the way I do it. Okay, let's place 1 right there. Hold down Shift, Control, come down to the bottom, place another. And there we go. Now we have successfully added 1 in. You can see it's kind of weird. We're gonna try to fix that. But now if we bring down the height, we give the appearance of there being notches without actually having modeled them in. This is probably the worst, the worst looking part of the entire model, if I do have to admit that. You probably would want to model it in if you're really creating like a AAA quality game asset. It's probably something we should have done. But here we are. This is part of the experience of modeling, really, is making those mistakes and learning from them. So now I know. Kind of have to just play around with this until we get so close to what we wanted. We're getting close to it. I don't know if it's possible to. Okay, what we're going to want to do is, this is tricky, getting the spacing right. It's going to require some fiddling. May want to decrease the size of the Y a little bit. And then decrease the spacing just a little bit more. Give it some more notches. It's unfortunate we placed the seam on the front, because if not, you could kind of hide it. It's really in a position where you can't. Let me just manually do these last few. Okay, you know, that looks okay, you know, looks okay. Let's do a multiply on that. All right, from afar, doesn't look half bad. And that pretty much concludes the modeling process for this, or not the texturing process. In the next chapter, we'll go ahead and export this out, bring it back into Blender, do the glass material, and then set it up for a pretty basic render. So hopefully this helped, you know, get some bearing of how you can leverage the smart materials within Substance Painter. And again, this is also pretty beginner oriented, so getting into crafting your own materials, that's not something that's within the scope of this tutorial. All right, I'll see you in the next chapter. Thanks for watching. Okay, welcome back. Today, we're going to export this out. So let's go to File, Export Textures, come to our directory. I just keep it in the basic directory, but I always make a new folder. We're going to call this Watch, whatever you want. Select the folder. And then on padding, go to No Padding Pass-Through. Okay, so our file type, let's use, I mean, PNGs are fine. That's what we're going to use, but PNGs are also pretty big. So if you're trying to put this on Sketchfab or anything else, I would really recommend JPEG. You're not really, in fact, let's just go ahead and do JPEG and do whatever you want, but it's not going to make a huge quality difference. And then if you want certain templates, if you're trying to take this into anything, you can. But essentially what this is going to export is the base color, the height, the metallic, the mixed AO, the normal and the normal OpenGL, and then the roughness. All right, so we are now going to export. Make sure you have it set with document channels plus normal plus AO with no alpha. Okay, and just like that, we have exported. So now let's navigate over to Blender, pull this up, and bring up our mesh. So make sure we're on the low poly because this is what we're going to be working with. Go ahead, and if you don't have this toggled, turn on the render view, and then make sure to turn off the render capability for anything we don't want in our renders, which will be everything but the low poly stuff. Let's go ahead and hide the glass for now. Come into the shading tab, and it looks like this does not have a new material, so we're just going to make a new material for it, and then press Control-Shift-T. This is the Node Wrangler add-on you'll want to enable from Blender. It ships with it. Everyone has it. Go turn it on. Substance Painter, Export, Watch Tutorial. We're going to bring in everything but the normal because we're using the OpenGL one. And there we go. Just like that. Now we want to make sure that all of our objects in the scene are using this. So we'll press A with the watch body selected and then link materials, and that'll automatically apply this material to everything. And there we go. Now in the next chapter, we're going to cover going over the glass material, how to create that, and the way we're going to utilize it. It'll only work within the Cycles render engine. So we'll also need to fix the scale of the glass. It's a little big right now, but that's okay. We can do that in the next one. Okay, welcome back to the next chapter. In this one, we're going to make the glass material. And there's also something else that I can't legally provide you that I'm going to be utilizing, which is I'm going to scale that down and apply the scale, which is the sort of some of the textures that I'm going to be using here. But you can go find them. I'm pretty sure I pulled these from polygon.com. Go look up Polygon, or you can find some free ones online. It is not required, but it is going to increase the realism of your scene, and you'll see why in a second. Let me go ahead and turn on my screencast keys. And okay, let's go ahead and make a new material called glass. And what we're going to do is delete this principled BSDF, and we're going to Shift A and bring in a glass BSDF. And if we just plug this in right now, let's see what it looks like. That is what it looks like. Now we're in Eevee right now, so if we turn on Cycles, let's see what it looks like. Not very good, but that's okay, because we're going to fix it. All right, so with the glass BSDF, we're using an IOR of 1.450. Let's bring in a mix shader, and then also a transparent BSDF node. Plug that in. Let's see what changes, if any. Getting some weird glass distortions there. And now for the factor, what we're going to do is bring in a light path, and then a two math nodes. So Shift D to duplicate. We're going to use a maximum, and then a multiply, and then on the is shadow ray, we're going to plug it up there, and then the is reflection way, plug it up there. Plug this into the value on the multiply. We'll go ahead and sort of subtract these, and then plug that into the factor. And then that's it. We have our basic glass set up right now, but we're going to take this a step further and bring in some roughness textures to assist. So I have two textures here that we're going to bring in. We're going to bring in an image texture. Let me just pull up the directory. I have these saved real quick. And I have a bunch of textures that I've downloaded over the years. This is one of them. Let me show you what it looks like. It's a alpha for wiping residue. You can go find that wherever you'd like. Polygon.com, I'm pretty sure, is where that one came from. It has been a while though. And I know I didn't pay for it, so at some point I had a free coupon to get some textures. Okay, so now fingerprints as well. We're going to mix these two together, so we're going to bring in a color ramp, and bring in two of them, and plug the colors into the factor. And then we're going to bring in another math node. just move all this out. And this is going to be set to multiply. Plug the values in there and then plug this into the roughness. And let's go ahead and load up an HDRI so we can see what's going on. So Easy HDRI is the plugin I'm going to use here. I'm going to navigate to my Blender directory, my HDRI folder where I have all these saved. Polyhaven is a great website. You can get some of these from for free. And let's rotate the HDRI to put some light on this so we can see what's going on. Let's turn on some denoising. Yes. Let's try to crunch some of these values here. For color space, this is non-color data. And you can kind of see the effect it has. It has some fingerprints and smudges. Let's see if we can see it in the material preview. Yes, we can. Cool. We'll just look at it here then because it's easier to visualize. You can see as we crunch this in, it'll blend it differently. So we bring it in. If we want it to be really hard to see through, like really worn, we could do that. But we'll make the fingerprints a little more apparent. And then on the UV editing, let's just go ahead and fix this up a little bit. So we're just going to project it from the view and then scale it up all the way. Come back into our shading. Let's see how that may have affected it. Yeah, it's changed it quite a bit. So now let's see what it's looking like. Okay. There's our watch. It's looking rough, looking vintage, looking beat up. Quite beat up on the back with that smart material. Let's go ahead and pop over and set up a basic scene to render this thing. So I'm going to make a new chapter for that, but in the next one we're going to set up some lighting and whatnot and set everything up. All right, so welcome back to the next chapter. In this one, we're going to set up a scene, light this bad boy, and get a render knocked out. So let's go ahead and add in a plane, and this is going to be our sort of backdrop here. Let's make sure we're scaling from the bounding box center. Scale it up. Let me turn on my screencast keys. And what we'll do is just extrude this out and then take these edges, bevel them a little bit, and then apply the scale, shade smooth, give this a material, and sort of the material we're going to go for is something dark with low amounts of roughness, and that'll work for now. Now we'll go ahead and add in a camera, and then do Control-Alt-0 on your numpad. That'll center it to your camera view, and then you can go to View, Lock to Camera View here, and then just sort of start moving it around, find a good spot to put it. In the camera controls down here, let's turn up the focal length, and then in the scene properties, let's change the dimensions on the Y to sort of increase it to about 2700. And then the focal length will increase that some more as well. And we'll unlock the camera, add in a area light. Let's turn on rendered view so we can see what's going on. And for speed's sake, we'll use Eevee for right now. And also, let's turn off this HDRI. Let's put the screen or the strength of it to 0 so we can just see only what our lights are affecting. Let's move it directly above it. Turn the strength up and then the spread. Okay, you have to go to cycles to see the spread. We'll move the spread down to about 118, pop over into our camera, see what we're doing here. Okay, maybe turn the power down to 100 and then add in another light and rotate this -90 along the X Let's move it behind the watch and turn off our top light so we can see what this is doing. Let's scale it out. And this is our rim light. Okay, so this adds some edge lighting detail. Looks pretty cool. Turn on our other one. We can see how this might affect it. If we turn it off, now we have this nice definition. We can even scale it out a little bit more to get the entire thing with the light there. Now we can add in another light. Let's come over into side view, move it about there, front view, rotate it along the Z, move it to about there. On this one, let's make it a little cooler, a white blue, and then set the power, much lower, maybe like 30. The spread, maybe like 74. Turn that off, see how that may affect it. That's letting a lot of detail come in there. That's nice. Let's make this darker. More like just barely, not entirely black. Let's see what we're getting. Okay, that's looking cool. Now let's add in another one of these. Just move it along the X, rotate it along the Z, maybe rotate it along the local Y, or no. Let's see. Local X by double tapping X, and then move it down a little bit. And give this one a slightly warmer color. Okay. Let's rotate it up along the X a little bit, and also along the Y. Light it from down here, and then turn the power down even more just to give it a hint. All right, let's give this some more render passes. Let's say 500, just to see what it may look like. And for our purposes, it's a pretty basic lighting setup. You could definitely do some more, do some cooler stuff, but that's it'll work for what we're trying to do. So yeah, we could absolutely just render that out right now. Something else we could do if we're feeling like it is animate the camera a little bit. So let's set up a keyframe on the camera and just press G and then left click to set the first keyframe. Turn this on to do automatic keying, and then say at frame 90 we want to move along here, and then if we rotate this along the 3D cursor, we can rotate it on the Z a little bit, and then maybe just move it up, and we can kind of see what this may look like. So it just kind of moves in a little bit. And if we want it to take a longer amount, we could go up here to a different frame, and it will just slowly pan in to the watch. And if you're using the cycles render, you can't really see it in real time. But this will let us just see it from a different angle. Maybe this angle looks better, in which case I actually, think it does. Something like that doesn't get bad. Maybe you want to tone down just a little bit. It's a little strong. Maybe to about 5. And yeah, that's how we texture and model a game vintage watch. So thank you everybody for watching. Hopefully this tutorial was of some use to you. Let me know what you think about it in the comment section down below. Check out my tutorials and time lapses. You can learn how to texture a game-ready katana in Blender and Substance Painter, which is a 2-hour-long course down in the description below. Go check that out. And if you want, you can support me on Patreon. Check that out as well. Otherwise, just comment, like, subscribe, and let me know what you want to see next. Thank you.